names. I go by Flo, and I'm in Boston. I am their early career student rep for the division. And I'm really, really excited to do this because this is something that I wish I had done as a first-time reviewer. So I've been at a couple of ICAs at this point now, and every few sort of like reviews, I also still need a refresher. So this was nice to sort of convene this and talk about some of the things that are already showing up, maybe some of the reviews you are doing. I want to introduce other officers in the room right now. So we have our vice chair, Wang Chen, who's in Texas, at the University of Texas, right? UT at
UT Austin,
Austin.
yeah.
UT Austin. So she's going to be sharing a little bit of like some of the best practices and some of the sort of like just context that would be helpful to know. And then Pablo Morales is over here too. That is our secretary, and he will be here facilitating all this as well. Are you in London right now?
I'm or based in London at the LSE, but
Okay.
currently physically in China.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. All I'm getting from this is I need to like leave and go somewhere fun for a few weeks. So we're gonna get started. I want to start with when on, so you can just sort of like give us the context of what's going on. So like how many admissions, reviews, just how does that work? And the timeline as well, because I know at least one person was curious about sort of just how to think about the timeline between all the submission stuff and when they have to get all their reviews in, and then when everybody hears back, just generally.
Thank you so much for organizing this. I know this is such a busy time of the year for so many of us, and welcome everyone, in particular our first year reviewers. Thank you for joining us. So as Flo just mentioned, I will just talk a little bit about the larger context and also the timeline. Okay, so my name is Wenhong Chen. I'm a professor of media studies and sociology in School of Journalism and Media at Moody College of Communication, University of Texas at Austin. So based on the information we received from the ICA headquarters, so we have another record-breaking year. We got more submissions than Paris, than Toronto, and the overall submission number to ICA this year is above 7,000 individual submissions alone. And so this year, so ICA set the overall acceptance rate around 1/3. To be specific, 32.7%. And at our division, we more or less follow this number. And for us, we received about 150 individual submissions and another 10 panel submissions. In overall, we have about 160 people sign up to be our reviewers. And based on all these numbers, the headquarters already informed us that we are going to have 16 sessions plus 2 posters in the coming ICA annual conference next summer in Denver. And these numbers are I would say we receive 25% more submissions this year. Although like the number of sessions and the posters we received from the headquarters didn't increase because I believe other divisions and groups also receive many more submissions this year. Okay, so this is the larger context. And the most important thing, deadline. I believe all of you have already received an email from me from yesterday, reminding everyone our deadline, and that's ICA set deadline for all the reviewers out there is December 6th. That means we have probably another 2 weeks to get our review done. So it's a very short deadline, December 6th. So I actually checked the review report last night, and I found like amazingly about 15% of our reviewers already completed their review. I bet if you are here, you probably belong that 85%. So hopefully after today's workshop, you will start review for the paper assigned to you. And if you got any questions, please feel free to contact me at any time. And we do have top faculty and student paper awards. So your work is very important. And we also have a Star Reviewer Award for our reviewers who deliver the best, most constructive reviews for our division. So I will stop here. If you have any questions, please let me know. And in my email, I also shared a link to best practice from ICA on review. And I think in the last several years, the highlight has always been, please remember this conference paper, conference panel, and we are working with our colleagues and deliver the most constructive comments as much as possible. And okay, I will stop here. And thank you very much. And we'll turn to Flo again.
All right. Thank you, Wenhong. That was really helpful. I'm shocked 15% of people actually have done this already. Shocked. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides just to get into sort of like the more tangible tips and things of that sort to get us started. Some of us who have not started our reviews. Can everybody see my me sharing the screen? So just somebody yell yes somewhere.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you to that person. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to share a few best practices that we've seen over the years. We had a similar workshop last year, so it's always good to refresh there. And also, just go over some of the things that might really be helpful. So one thing that I want to sort of talk about real briefly and shake off is some of the jitters that come with this. And this is not sort of limited to beginners, but this is definitely how I felt doing my first ICA reviews. Just recognizing that this can be really daunting, right? Especially if you've never written any kind of review before, not just for ICA, but anywhere, right? This happened when I was a graduate student there. Also, if it's maybe your first conference, right, there might be questions about whether you actually have the quote unquote skills to write a review, right? Even though you've submitted your paper, right? Concerns about whether your suggestions and opinions will look silly, right? In the way you write them, in the way you express them. And this workshop is sort of gesturing towards getting some kind of structure, at least getting you started, so that you have the kind of language, some of the wording to help you feel more comfortable doing this kind of thing. I'm only a graduate student, early career scholar. We all are. There are lots and lots of us, and we're very, very valuable. We're a very valuable part of ICA. So stand in it proudly, right? You have the skills, you have the expertise. It's really important work that you're doing. So all these are really valid concerns, not particularly unusual usual. So if you're feeling this way, it's not a weird thing you're feeling. We all kind of are, right? So I'm going to go over some of the basics of just like what to know, right? In case you haven't really dug into ICA's website, there's also more there. But I will add a few more tips, right? So the basics here, right? So you have these papers, 2, sometimes 3, right? It's helpful to at least just skim the paper just to get an idea of what's happening. So one of the questions in the forums was sort of like, how do I try to understand this? My time is limited, right? Without having to read every single line of a paper, all right? It helps to at least get an idea of this. The title will give you some idea, right? The abstract, the keywords, that's why they're there, the introduction, the conclusion. I put methods in brackets and I will say why later, but it's because sometimes it's not evident where the methods are in a paper depending on sort of like the structure, the sub-discipline it's in, so that can be a little tricky, but at least these other parts should be helpful. Then read the whole paper first before you start writing. So you don't want to skim and get right into writing because you might have missed a few things, right? But at least this part will be faster because you've done quite a little skim here. So you have a basic idea of what you're looking for. So before you start reading, you want to ask, based on some of these things, right? What are my expectations of this paper? What do I hope to learn, right? The abstract will often tell you the kinds of things you should be finding, right? That the author themselves has argued that you should be finding in the paper. So part of the test is the paper actually doing what the abstract says it's doing, right? While reading, while you're going through, especially here when you're reading the whole paper, right? Are the arguments being made, the evidence and the logic clear? So this also often includes the methods section. There are parts that are confusing. So you want to note those down and try to figure out why it is they're confusing. Some of your critique will come from that space, right? Do I expect this information? Do I expect this information to come next, right? So sometimes structurally, right, in terms of logic or argument, you expect certain sort of conclusions, right? A certain line of reasoning. So you want to see, is that making sense? If it's not making sense, that might be something you might note later, right? Do things like tone and style work well here? So that's also like, that can be quite subjective, right? But you want to also keep that in mind, right? After reading the whole paper, right, when you've gone through all these things, have my expectations been met? So go back to the abstract, right? And some of the things that the author or authors claimed they were doing, right? Are they actually doing that thing in the paper, right? What information should have included? So if you have a hunch that something is missing here, or sort of like the gaps, right, in the to make the logic clear, this might be something to mention. How significant is this contribution? This can be quite subjective, and we can talk about that later, right? But it should be adding something, right, to the scholarly discussion. How does the paper demonstrate the contribution? So oftentimes papers will say they're contributing something, and then it's not quite evident. So you want to figure out if that's what's happening and note that, right, in your critique. So these are the basics, right? This is what you're sort of thinking. ICA categories generally are sort of set out like this, right? So relevance to the division, how relevant is the submission, theoretical, philosophical depth, and sophistication. Is there, okay. All right, I'll keep going. Theoretical or philosophical depth and sophistication. So you need to evaluate sort of this is where some of the contributions come in here, right? Clarity, how clearly does the author present the overall argument? Innovation, how innovative is the submission? Are there any new things here? Interesting. Critical interventions, methodology, right? The arguments they're making, do they actually make sense with the kinds of methods they've used? Or is the question they're asking, right, sort of answered through their methodology, right? Does that actually align? Overall, what is the overall impression, right? A while ago, ICA used to have, I think, something speaking to style, like writing style. They took that out for various reasons I will elaborate on. But this is the general sort of like way that you are supposed to assess the papers, right? This feels straightforward at first and in theory, and then in practice it gets a little tricky, right? So how does it get tricky? I will sort of like expand on that soon. Another thing that ICA recommends is that when you're reviewing, right, you have at least minimum 3 sentences when you're thinking about some of these things, right, that you should summarize the main points at least off the paper, then assess the paper's contribution, right, then name at least one thing that the submission does well. So this is a good place to start if you just like, I don't know what to write, right, to just go over these 3 things. This makes for a good, okay, solid review, right? But we do want to offer something a little more. We want to be helpful with some of our critiques and reviews. So think about how you would want someone to approach your paper, right? You don't want them to kind of be flippant about the ideas you're putting forward, right? You want them to actually engage in ways that are helpful for you to improve the paper or later on present the paper, right? So you want to include helpful paragraphs that may go beyond the minimum 3 sentences required, right? And when you write to summarize the paper so that you sort of like demonstrate that you understand what the author is trying to say or what the paper does, right? Before you get into the critique, you might use language like, this paper study aims to something or the other, right? Conducts this and that, and finds, argues, etc. So this is one way in which you could actually just start the review here. Some language, right? You want to identify positive points on the paper. So it's very rare that there's nothing good happening in the paper, right? People put a lot of work into this. So you want to at least say something about how you appreciate how the authors did this and that, right? Something, or I like to say, you know, when a topic is particularly timely, I like to mention those kinds of things. Then identify your concerns with the paper. So, you know, you don't want to go in and say the paper is really bad, I really hated it, right? You want to phrase that in a certain way, something like the paper may significantly improve by, or maybe tweaked, right, by addressing this, that, and the third, whatever your critique is, right? Explain why you're making your recommendation. So it's not enough to sort of say, you know, this is a bad paper, I don't like it, reject. Right? You want to explain what it is about the paper that you find maybe particularly problematic, or the concern, right? You want to actually describe it. That would be a much more helpful critique, and it also won't make you sound like a jerk. So, right, you want to have actual rhyme and reason behind why you're making certain decisions, right? As Hong mentioned, right, you want to give yourself enough time and space to do this. So sometimes, you know, especially papers that are on something that you might not feel as comfortable in your expertise in, you want to give yourself enough time to be able to go back to that paper if you have to. So this is due December 6th, right? We're 2 weeks out. So you probably definitely want to at least open the papers now, right, to see kind of what you're working with, right, the papers you've been assigned, so that if you do have questions or extenuating circumstances, you're not kind of stuck and freaking out the night before it's due, right? You want to think about respect. We've already kind of touched on this, but just want to reiterate this, right, in the way that you want to approach how you're phrasing things, right? So think about the trope of reviewer number 2, right? You don't want to be that. You want to be constructive. You don't have to like just shower praise on it, but you don't want to be cruel with your approach, right? You want your feedback to be constructive and qualitative. By qualitative, I really mean descriptive, right, about the things you're saying. Less vague, more detailed would be great. The way you do that in your critique might be offering actual actionable things based on the arguments that one could do in the paper, right? So how could we actually move this forward? So based on the critique, what would you then do? As a next step, you could offer that to the authors. If you really, really don't like the paper, right, think about how to express that in a way that moves the scholarly conversation forward. right? So less sort of like personal attacks or things that sound like that, and more sort of like how do we move this idea forward, and then the next iteration, for example, of this paper, right? Another thing that's not covered in the ICA guidelines that might be helpful to think about, especially when you're reviewing the kinds of work that our division really cares about, we can be pretty broad geographically, ideologically, etc., right? It's good to realize that, you know, even though you have subject matter expertise and you have a particular idea of what fits in a particular division, you don't want to automatically assume that a particular topic, subject, geographical, and cultural context does not belong to a division. So if you feel very strongly about this, you want to kind of tease out why it is that you think it doesn't fit in that division, right? Is it a valid critique of what's actually happening, right, in the paper? Language, this has been a big one, and this is part of the reason why the writing style caveat was taken out, because oftentimes, right, we start judging on writing style, prose, things like that, and not the actual merits and research going on in the paper. So you might sort of like note that, right, but you don't want to sort of like reject a paper based on just stylistically you don't like how it's written, right? Even though the ideas, the methodology, the theoretical framework, and things of that sort that really make a paper, right, are there, right? So this is not as intense as journal article reviewing, right? This is sort of like papers for a conference. Of course, they have to be good, right? But we're going to the conference to present these papers in a different way, right, than we would in certain journals. So, you know, that's sort of like, there's a little bit of a difference there, right? Sometimes we don't like papers because they're aligned to particular citations that we think should be in there. And it's good to recognize that citations can be highly political, right? They're not sort of like objective things. Some choices that folks make reflect particular sort of like intellectual traditions they align with. So you can tell a lot about someone's work through that kind of thing, right? So don't assume that sort of like the citations that you think belong there should be the only ones that should be in this paper, right? So definitely something to think about here. Another thing, especially in our division, but definitely across divisions, right, is that not all research papers look the same, right? So this is even still really broad, but it can get us thinking into sort of like the kinds of papers you might get that might not align with the kind of research that you do. So for example, when you're looking at a lot of science, social science papers, right, you might get this kind of structure with the intro, methods, right, clearly stated, findings, discussion, conclusion, right? It can be pretty uniform. But you might find other papers that don't have this kind of typical section heading, right? So sometimes in some social sciences, you find that kind of thing. It also depends on the objective of the paper, right? So it might not have the quote unquote empirical data in the way that you think it should be, but really maybe is an analysis, right, of the scholar's work, literary work. It's more sort of like conceptual, right? That doesn't mean it's a bad paper. It just means it's sort of like coming in from a different angle, right? So definitely think about that. If that's your critique, sort of like, is this a valid critique? Is this actually a bad paper, or is it because I'm really sort of like a social science person in a particular way and I haven't seen a lot of this kind of work, right? So think about that, right? Here's sort of like another tip from our star reviewer from last year, Leah Mueller, who couldn't make it, but had really, really useful things to consider here, right? So here she points out the diversity of the kinds of reviewers that we have, right? And that we should also keep in mind that cultural differences can play a role in how we write reviews. So there are a couple of things that do work across cultures, though, that I think are relevant for all of us in this room. One of them is to be constructive. Approach the article in a way that you want to help the authors improve their work by being critical and also constructive, right? So not just critical, but also constructive, right? Explain why it is that you're saying the things you're saying about their work, right? So Leah says, if I critique something, I make sure I explain this criticism. I show how something might be lacking and how this could be improved. So this is just hammering in some of the points I iterated earlier, right? Offer a way forward. So you want to move the conversation forward, right? According to Leah, I offer an alternative way of thinking about things. I'm leaving the authors with explanation, critical views, right, and ways forward. So this also falls under sort of like the actionable stuff that I was talking about. Respect, showing integrity and respect are also crucial, as well as offering a comprehensive review, right? So you want to be respectful by also looking at the entire sort of like body of work they're offering, right? Rather than focusing on one part only. So if you like, I hate this literature, right? That's not like, you want to look at it sort of holistically, right? Here. And then really quickly before I close out so we can start talking more informally and answering questions and so forth, right? Just want to reiterate, if you haven't already, there is official conference review guide, right, by ICA that has all kinds of tutorials there. So more short video clips, etc., right? I can drop the link in the chat and later on when I share the recording. But yeah, you can definitely find really useful things there that sort of like apply more broadly, right? Some of the things that we talked about here that I shared might not be in this particular reviewer guide, and that's why we have this workshop. But sort of like generally, it would be good to at least look at this before you start. As well. And within that, I will also drop the link, right? Other divisions have had really, really cool and relevant reviewer tips. So Game Studies division has one that I found pretty useful. So I will share that, and I'm sure there are a few others around. So I'll share that sort of like as I see them for the folks that are here and registered for the workshop, right? And I thought this part that they highlighted was really useful to think about, right? So just as this, in the same way that some of us might be feeling nervous about being first-time reviewers, right? The folks on the other side, the people that have written the papers we're reviewing, some of them are sort of like getting feedback, right? Peer review for the first time as well. So like, it's nice, it's good to think about sort of like this reciprocal thing that's happening, right? In the way that you approach the work in terms of tone, respect, etc. So, and then they have other handy dandy tips later on that are really helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just ask a question. And the question is, do you have any questions? I know a few definitely came through the form. I tried to hit on a lot of them, but we might have missed some of them. And this is the time to unpack some of that. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay. So I think we're good. I think everyone can still hear me. So I will open up the floor now for if there are any sort of like initial questions that we can tackle about the process, or even just about sort of like beyond the stuff I shared, just feelings. Open to that too. If not, I can kind of look through the list to see if we can start with one that was submitted through the registration form. And also, so feel free to drop those in the chat or just unmute or raise your hand and ask the question.
While we wait for the question. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Pablo. Yeah.
Oh, I think someone wanted to ask a question, but while we wait for questions, I was just gonna add just a few comments that could be also helpful. The first one has to be with the scope of our division. And there might be papers that you find that maybe are not necessarily fit for our division in itself. So just remember what our division is about. It's global communication and social change. The fact that a paper might be about something of a country far away from your own reality, it doesn't mean necessarily that it fits the description of global communication or social change. So really think of is there any comparison between different realities in different parts of the world? Is it about phenomena that transcend national boundaries? And that will give you more or less an idea of whether the paper does fit our division or not. If it doesn't, um, and you're still reluctant to maybe reject it, you can always put a message in the feedback. In the feedback there are two boxes. One that is the messages, your feedback to the author itself, and another one that is the anonymous feedback that goes to the to the editor, the person that manages everything. So you can also put a message there about what reservations you may have regarding that particular paper. Um, and one of the main messages is also that you need to strike a balance of all these different sections that Flo mentioned. Sometimes it might be quite clear the idea, but it's not well delivered, or it might be confusing, but it's really well. I don't know, maybe the methodology is brilliant, but it's not well explained. So try to find a balance between all these sections, and that will give you more or less an idea. And it helps that in the system itself, you have to choose for each of these sections, you have to give them a grade, a point. So that will give you an idea of whether it should be a pass or not, whether you will recommend to reject or to accept. And another tip regarding the papers in general is that some of you might have been assigned extended abstracts. So it's a bit different from a whole paper. So, and if you have an extended abstract and it has been assigned to you, just also think of the potential of the paper and the research, because it's research that it might not be there yet, or it might be finished, but the author hasn't had the time to really put a whole paper together, or it might be work in progress. So think of the potential, and in the feedback, you could point to what you would expect the author to have accomplished or finished by the time they present the research at the ICA. So that's it. And in the case of the papers that you think you're going to recommend to be rejected, that's when the feedback should be quite compelling. Explain why you think this research is not robust in itself. And think of yourself the times that you have have had a paper rejected, not necessarily a conference, but maybe a publication or something. What is it that you would have liked the reviewer to tell you? So try to point to things that that they should be thinking about improving, not necessarily just mean criticisms, as Flo mentioned before. So think forward. What should they be doing? Because it's also about not just rejecting papers just because we think that they are not good enough. It might be the research itself might be quite good, but maybe it's not well delivered. But we still have a responsibility towards the ICA that we accept papers that are going to be academically sound as well. Yeah, so it's that balancing act that we have to kind of in a way work towards. So I think that's it from me. So hopefully we have more questions from everyone else.
May I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for organizing this. And I myself actually reviewed for NCA and CA, but I developed my own method, but this was really helpful. And I'm sure like those who are attending or doing first time, it would be great help for them. And I developed my own method, but as I reviewed for journal publication and also for conference, I was struggling in one thing. When I did review for conference like ICA, I gave really detailed feedback, and then that also takes time. and which actually put a lot of pressure at some point. So if you can, could you please explain what is the expectation if you compare the conference paper with the journal manuscript, like more general expectation, the intensity difference? Thank you.
I have like quick thoughts on this, and then Pablo, you could probably jump in. So I think obviously because we care about quality reviews, right? And we do realize that they take a long time. Like we want you to spend time on these reviews, right? But they're not, in my opinion, because this is mostly while the papers are like quite polished, right? A lot of them, like the abstracts, etc., like sort of like it's work in progress, right? We're not as sort of like intense as sort of journal reviews, right? But we still expect that quality. So there's a little bit of balance there, I would say, and I do recognize that it's very time consuming, right? And ICA has this basic sort of like you need to at least hit this basic sort of like quality, right? You need to have at least 3 lines, right, per section. But I think I would expect a little bit more than this. So a little bit more than just like a 1-liner or 2-liner, 3-liner in every section, right? But sort of like keeping in mind that this is a conference, right, and a conference paper, and not sort of like a very intense journal submission, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I may add a comment to that. What helps, I think, is to bear in mind what a conference is for and what a publication is supposed to be as well. So for a publication, we really expect a top quality research. And there we need to be very careful in how the research itself, or how robust the research itself is, how well it is explained, whether it's aligned, the research questions are aligned to the methodology, whether the authors show that they understand the phenomenon and they know the literature. So it's a much exhaustive analysis of the whole paper. The purpose of a conference is, in most cases, is to get feedback from your peers as well. So what we're doing is just a first step. It's a filter of recognizing that a paper has potential and is good quality, or has the potential to reach really high quality. Yeah. So think of that, and that should help you to kind of assess whether a paper is worth accepting to the conference, and whether it will benefit from being presented at a particular conference. So don't expect the papers to be as good as what you would expect for a publication. Yeah. So this is just the first step. People get it out there, get feedback from their peers, and once they've done that, then they might consider publishing or submitting it for publication later on. So it will never be as I would say finished or polished as one would expect. So I would say think of the potential and whether in general if you can strike that balance of all the sections. And in terms of how much feedback or how much time you should spend on it, I think it's so depending on case to case. So there might be papers that you read it and it's brilliant and everything just fits into place. So you might spend very little time in that paper because you know that they are ticking all those boxes. What is much, or the opposite, when the paper is a complete disaster, and it does happen, because a lot of people are trying to get papers, and sometimes we have so much work that we don't have enough time to dedicate to an abstract, and sometimes we send stuff that is really not ready there yet. So don't be afraid of rejecting if it just doesn't make sense at all. So those two cases are the easy ones, and you'll spend very little time in the decision. Everything in between is much more difficult because you will see the potential, but maybe it's not there yet, or maybe it's just confusing, but you can see that there's a lot of work behind it. So that's where you need to strike a balance. And I would say, dedicate as much time as you can, but put yourself in the shoes of the other person. How much time do you think you would expect someone else to read your paper? Because I think we all have received feedback, even when we submit papers for a publication, where we get reviewer number 2 saying a couple of sentences that have nothing to do with our paper. So just to try to avoid those situations, something that you wouldn't like to be done to you, don't do it to others. So spend as much time as you can make it possible, because you all are working as well in your own research. And the feedback, be kind as you would expect others to be kind to you, and as constructive as you can as well. I hope that helps.
Oh, I want to add something real quick that might be helpful, just more generally, especially if you're doing in grad school. So the way I used to think about sort of like my conference submissions was it's sort of, I'm trying to get feedback. Sometimes I'll even, if the paper is accepted, I'll even ask for feedback on like what kinds of journals this kind of paper might go to. So it's sort of like, it's that in between steps. So it needs to be like good enough for us to be having that kind of conversation, or at least imagine it. Right, but it doesn't have to be like as polished as like the journal I'm trying to submit to. But it still needs to have like sort of like the kind of potential where we can even have that conversation, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
I thank you, Florence and Pablo. I just wanted to, my question actually is an extension of the previous question. I'm just curious about, is there like once we do the review, is that the final stage, or does, the committee or the division, do they look at it? And probably maybe how does it work behind the scenes once all the reviews are submitted? If you have that information, that is.
So in general, the process is that everyone would submit feedback, both your comments about the paper, but you also need to score them. So you will provide a score and a recommendation. And the word recommendation is telling you already that it's not the final answer. But what will happen is that you will get a score for that particular paper based on the calculations made of all the different aspects that you choose. And then when there's a list of all the papers and the recommendations, then there will be a conversation regarding how many papers we can fit and we can accept. And we will do the best to try to accommodate most of the papers within that range. So because we only have allocated a number of panels, right? So we also need to be thinking of how do all these panels fit, and can we create panels with the papers that have been submitted? Yeah. So the recommendation is there, and that's the most important part for you. But then the team later on decides exactly how each panel is going to be organized and how many papers we can accept in general. So when Hon explained a little bit of that, she didn't go into the details, but the meaning is that since we have a number of panels that is limited, and we cannot accept more papers, even if we had like amazing papers and we would like to accommodate them all, it's impossible for us to do that. So that's how we're working, and that's why we also need to strike a balance, even if we wanted to accept as many as we could, but we have to work within those limits that are imposed to us by the constraints of a conference setting, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to hit a question in the chat real quick. So could you show the slide with 3 ICA guideline and ideal feedback paragraph? Do you still want to see that? Because I can share that really quickly. Let's see. Okay, so it should be this one. Um, okay, I think Alauddin, do you want to say more about the
Okay,
question? You just want to,
I
yeah.
missed some like detail in the on the right hand side. So thank you
Okay.
for sharing it.
I will also actually just, when we share the recording, I will just share the slide deck to everybody that registered to make that easier.
I don't know.
Okay. All right.
So I got it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we've got like 10 minutes and then we've got to go. Let me see. I'm trying to see if there are any ones we haven't covered that others asked in the forum. There are resources of support systems available.
Maybe just another comment on a few things that just came into mind is that sometimes you might find a paper that even if it's anonymous, you realize that you know the people who wrote them. So if you have to excuse yourself, please don't doubt about that. If there's any conflict of interest as well, please do so. So that we are aware of that and we can assign that paper to another person. So try to do that as soon as you can, because that's also very important to be ethical also in the way we conduct reviews.
Yeah, this is similar with journal articles too. Where that kind of thing happens all the time, and then you gotta like say so or email the editor. Pablo, do you know who you? So do you just email? You just tell the person in the division, right, that assigned it?
In the system itself, there's a little box that you can tick there. If you need to
Okay.
excuse yourself, if you cannot do that particular paper because there's some conflict of interest or anything, you can do that directly on the platform.
Okay. There was a question in the forum regarding that. That's why I asked it that way. And like, if you have any questions that are not covered on any forum. So the question was, are there resources or support systems available? And who do I contact if I have questions about a particular paper? I don't know if we have mechanisms for that.
Well, you can send an email to the division, to us. So Wen Hong is the one that is in charge of allocating the papers to the reviewers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, but if you send an email to any of us from the any of the officers from the division, we will make sure that your email gets to the right person. So you can go on the ICA website and there you will find the our contact details. In any case, for those that have registered, we will be sending the slides and that information through an email, right?
Yeah. In my experience, I haven't come across a question where I had to like email somebody. Usually, like if it's not somewhere in sort of like just where I'm writing stuff, it's usually either in the ICA guidelines somewhere, or like there are a bunch of hyperlinks there where they also have frequently asked questions stuff. And I've often found the answer there. But so if you have one, someone's probably thought of that question before. But I would say, yeah, if it's like beyond, like it's not any of that, then yeah, you contact Wenhong or whoever assigned the paper to you.
Yeah. And remember that reviewing papers, it's something that also needs some a particular space and time and mind moment, that if you're not feeling that you should be doing a review at a particular time, just leave it for later on. If you read a paper and you didn't understand anything and you're not feeling well, then just leave it for later and come back later on. Don't rush it. And once you have an idea, or if you're struggling to kind of make a decision, there are two kinds of people: those that go in that are overly critical and are very quick to just reject papers, and are those that want to accept all the papers because they think they always see that spark behind behind the paper. So it's a very personal decision. So try to take time for that, right? Um, just see, as I said before, just put yourself on the other side. What are you expecting? And don't be shy if the paper really is not up to the standard or to the level that you think it should be, say so. If you're doubting a lot, but you see the potential, as I said, you can always leave the feedback for the author in the box, and there's another box that you can express your reservations or other comments, or maybe if the paper might not be of a great quality, but you see the potential, you can also explain that in that other box, so that whenever we have to decide which papers are going to be accepted in general, we can take those comments into account as well for the final stage.
That's really helpful. Any other questions, concerns? Anyway, we're doing pretty good on time. So I think we've definitely hit, I think, all the questions that were submitted. So yeah, so I'll be sharing the slides. So like the same way I shared the email I sent with this with the information for the workshop. So I will just send sort of like Google Slides that everybody can access there. And again, cannot stress enough, and I'm saying this to myself too, if you have not even like taken a peek at what you need to be reviewing, you should probably like do that now, soon, so that you have time to sort of like at least see what you're dealing with, right? And see what kind of space you need to be in and how much time you need to dedicate, and that time not be the night before everything's due, right? So Pablo, do you have any last statements, last thoughts that might be helpful?
I would say the main thing is thank you so much, all of you, for attending this workshop. It tells that you're taking this very seriously. So in the name of the whole division, the officers in the division, I thank you for your work, and I know you'll do great. So if you have any doubts or questions that you would like to ask, please don't hesitate to send us an email, and we'll try to do our best to reply as soon as we can. And if you need to excuse yourself for any reason, please let us know, and there's no problem about that either. Of course, you can do it through the platform as well, so do that. And that's all. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Flo and Pablo. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we can go. I will mute for a second, and then I'll close out once everyone's out the room.